America and World War II. Why the United States stayed neutral for so long. 2 years before the sudden attack on Pearl Harbor drew the United States into World War II in December 1941, the country was already on the brink of global conflict, yet remained cautious and indecisive. To understand why Americans long avoided direct involvement, it is important to consider both the international context of the 1930s and domestic sentiments within the United States. Unlike World War I, which erupted suddenly and involved several of the largest European powers immediately, World War II began more gradually and in fragments. August 1914 marked a sharp escalation as 5 major European powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, France, Russia, and Great Britain, almost simultaneously entered into conflict. By 1939, however, the war initially involved only 3 major European nations, Germany, Great Britain, and France. Italy joined in June 1940, the Soviet Union in June 1941, and Japan and the United States only in December 1941. Yet actual hostilities between Japan and China began as early as July 1937, several years before Western powers became involved.
The American experience in World War I and its impact on 1930s policy. The United States' entry into World War I was relatively straightforward. By 1917, opposition to involvement in the conflict was minimal. The reasons for war were specific and understandable. Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare threatened American economic and civilian interests by targeting merchant ships. President Woodrow Wilson appealed to Congress to declare war on Germany, and the decision was supported overwhelmingly, 82 votes to 6 in the Senate and 373 to 50 in the House of Representatives. In contrast, joining World War II proved far more complicated. Congress and the American public debated for months whether intervention was justified. The country only fully entered the global conflict after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941.
Why America wanted to stay out of the war. The conflict in Asia, starting with the war between Japan and China in 1937, was seen by most Americans as a distant problem that did not directly threaten U.S. interests. The same could be said about events in Europe, the remilitarization of the Rhineland in 1936, the annexation of Austria, and the occupation of Czechoslovakia after the Munich Agreement in 1938 were significant but remote threats. Even Hitler's invasion of Poland in September 1939, which led to Britain and France declaring war, was not widely perceived by Americans as an immediate danger. Nevertheless, President Franklin D. Roosevelt publicly condemned the aggression of Japan, Italy, and Germany. In 1937, in Chicago, he called for a quarantine of aggressive nations and openly criticized the Nazi regime in Germany. His rhetoric reflected a desire to prepare the country for potential future threats, though most politicians and voters remained isolationist. Isolationism was deeply entrenched in American policy. Congress and the public believed that the U.S., protected by 2 oceans, should not get involved in European wars. This view was reinforced by the experience of World War I. Isolationists argued that the U.S. entered the war in 1917 not to defend democracy, but to serve the economic interests of arms manufacturers. Additionally, the economic situation in the 1930s, the Great Depression, high unemployment, and agricultural problems demanded a focus on domestic issues. Americans were reluctant to embark on new military adventures abroad, preferring to address problems at home. May-June 1940, the turning point. In May and June 1940, the situation in Europe changed dramatically. Americans had expected the European war to be protracted, with the Allies eventually prevailing due to larger populations and greater resources. Instead, German forces achieved rapid and unexpected victories, conquering France and effectively controlling Western and Central Europe. Italy opened a new front against Britain in the Mediterranean, threatening British naval power and colonies. It now appeared that if assistance was not provided, the U.S. could find itself the only power capable of countering Germany. Furthermore, the resource-rich colonies of Southeast Asia, controlled by France and the Netherlands, fell under foreign occupation, and British holdings might be weakened if London concentrated its forces on the European front.
By September 1940, Japan had deployed troops to northern French Indochina, reinforcing the growing sense of danger. The United States began to play a critical role in supporting Britain, providing resources, military equipment, and strategic assistance. That same month, Germany, Japan, and Italy signed the Tripartite Pact, hoping to deter U.S. involvement in the war.
Roosevelt and the cautious policy of intervention. President Roosevelt proceeded carefully. Before the 1940 election, he promised to keep the U.S. out of direct participation, which helped him win an unprecedented third term. After his victory, he began using presidential powers to gradually increase support for the Allies. In September 1940, the U.S. transferred 50 older destroyers to Britain. In the winter of 1940-41, Roosevelt proclaimed the U.S. the arsenal of democracy, and by March 1941, Congress passed the Lend-Lease Act, allowing Britain to receive arms without direct payment. In 1941, secret consultations took place between American and British military leaders. In July, U.S. Marines were sent to Iceland, and in August, Roosevelt and Churchill signed the Atlantic Charter, aimed at countering international aggression. From September onward, U.S. ships began escorting British convoys in the Atlantic. In the Far East, the U.S. intensified economic pressure on Japan. In response to Japan's expansion into southern French Indochina, Washington froze Japanese assets and, along with Britain and the Netherlands, halted oil exports. This limited Japan's ability to expand its influence, but also prompted Tokyo to undertake risky actions, including attacks on the Philippines and Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor and America's entry into the war. Intelligence indicated Japanese activity in Southeast Asia, but could not predict the precise strike on Pearl Harbor. The attack was a military success for Japan, but a political catastrophe. It united the American public and secured widespread support for war. In his famous Day of Infamy speech on December 8, 1941, Roosevelt called for a declaration of war against Japan. Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S. on December 11th, a strategic misstep by Hitler, which drew them into conflict with a powerful new adversary and fully committed the United States to the global struggle. From that point, the American economy, society, and military fully mobilized. A nation that had long stayed on the sidelines became a decisive factor in the outcome of World War II. The events of Pearl Harbor marked a turning point in the 20th century and reshaped the global order forever.